Wildfires are ones that we need to prepare for. And then the other types of fires are the ones that we can really actively prevent. You can't prevent a wildfire from happening, miles away and fire and smoke coming through. Those are the ones that we can prepare for and cut away. The ones that we can prevent, the big one, it's electrical fires.
Well, hello and welcome back to the Lightwell Podcast. So glad to have you again. Today, we're going to be talking about fire risk. We've talked about all kinds of risks related to churches and ministries and their facilities. This one is unique and it applies across the country, but probably nowhere more so than the state of California. So to talk about this in depth, both from a preparation and a response standpoint, we are going to be speaking with Charlie Cutler. He works with an agency called ChurchWest in the state of California, and he has more than 2 decades of experience helping churches prepare for and respond to fires. So let's get right into our conversation with Charlie. Well, it is my pleasure to be joined by Charlie Cutler. He works with ChurchWest, an agency in the state of California, working with churches out there for several decades now. You can tell me exactly how long, Charlie, but thank you so much for being on the Lightwell Podcast.
I'm glad to be here, and I've been 25 years, but the agency's been over 50. And thanks for having me, Adam.
Oh man, we're so glad to have you. Now, because you're in the state of California, you are unfortunately familiar with the risk of fire for churches. And so because of that, we've brought you on. We'd love to hear your perspective on this, but let's start with the basic question of how does fire safety factor into a ministry's sort of stewardship of their building? Like, how do you see that fitting into just taking care of your building well, being aware of fire risks?
Kind of talking two different things. One, fire safety. If a fire happened while, ministry activities were going on, that's one thing altogether. Then there's the property fire risk as well. And two, both very important. Obviously, the life safety is the most important. And, it's so much of this is just looking at it with fresh eyes, looking at it and having somebody address this at the ministry. A lot of it is common sense. One of the good things in California is that the local fire departments do meet with churches, schools, other areas wherever the public gathers. They do come in and they inspect it every year, every couple of years, and they give their recommendations. We have good resources on our website that are about fire safety, and I think a lot of that is common sense and just addressing it. On the property side, that's the really disruptive thing that we have here in California when it comes to, wildfire gets all the attention. I should say it gets all the attention. That's the one we hear about all the time, and we see these giant wildfires, and some of these are areas that need to burn. It's because there's, it's a big state. There's a lot of fuel in this state, and sometimes it burns, and ministries are most impacted by smoke. It's called the wildland urban interface. But I think the big thing they could do is work with local authorities, get a fresh set of eyes on things, and say, not only for life safety, but on preventing property claims and, cutting back trees, keeping things, raking all the leaves up and keeping it clear.
That's really good. So, obviously you don't know every risk at every church. And like you're saying, advocating getting fresh eyes on it is a great step for churches. But based on your exposure to or your experience with churches, what are some of those common fire hazards for ministries and nonprofit facilities?
Wildfires are ones that we need to prepare for. And then the other types of fires are the ones that we can really actively prevent. You can't prevent a wildfire from happening, miles away and fire and smoke coming through. Those are the ones that we can prepare for and cut away. The ones that we can prevent, the big one, it's electrical fires. Those don't hit the news. I'm trying to think, Adam, what musical instrument do you play? You play the guitar, right?
I do.
The electric guitar.
I do.
Riffs on the stage, right? Well, it wasn't like that when most church buildings were built. We didn't have all these musicians that had all the electrical equipment and boosters and whatever it is that you do. I'm like the least musical person. You're the most musical person. But you musicians get out there and say, I need this, I need this. And what happens is we have just power cord into power cord into power cord. And those kinds of things are the ones that are preventable. And it seems silly, but the musician comes up here, gets on the stage, and as they're up there, they're kind of running things together. And then the people that are more risk management minded, which usually isn't the musicians, but it's the other folks at the church. Sorry, Adam, not to dig on you.
I'm really taking a beating on this question.
No, I'm kidding. No, but
I know.
But it's guys that are like, hey, we're focused on one thing, and then the other folks are the more risk management side. And that's why when I go out to a church, I'm saying, hey, let's walk into the sanctuary. Let's walk around. Let's go to the back of the sanctuary. Let's go to the front of the sanctuary. And when we're at the front of the sanctuary, I'm saying, hey, your musicians need to clean this stuff up, because those are very common electrical fires. And we see it in the kitchen as well. We have large commercial kitchens, and you've got to make sure that the Ansel system is being monitored and maintained. You've got to make sure that that the area is clean, and that it's all being maintained in the kitchens as well.
Well, on top of learning that this is primarily my fault, I do want to ask about the age of a lot of church buildings. So, some of these buildings that churches meet in are beautiful, older facilities, and you wouldn't want to trade that. But at the same time, when those buildings were built, you're facing different things now, musicians included, but different things now than you were back then. So when you think about older facilities, electrical, I'm guessing, is one of those primary things. But what are the other considerations for older buildings when it relates to fire prevention and safety?
Older buildings, and the things we're doing, not just the musical instruments, but computers and audiovisual systems and lighting and all of those different things, it's designed for something different than what it's being used for. I mean, really, you've got to look at it and say, let's update things. Let's add panels. And that's something that ministries try to avoid doing. It's not that expensive. I mean, it's not cheap either, but some of these things, we've been blessed with these, buildings. Sometimes these are bigger, older buildings, but we've got to invest in getting an electrician to come out here, get out there to the church, looking at everything and having a professional do it, and not to put it off. But that's pretty common with the older ministries. And, there's always the things like cloth wiring and old wiring. You got to get a pro out there. It's not something that you can have a volunteer just check all the lights and say, yep, they're going on, we're doing fine. You need somebody to look behind the walls.
Yeah, that's good. I think the big takeaways I heard from that is being proactive is so important when it comes to these things. You don't know that you have a problem until you've actually, like you said, looked behind the walls, or until something bad happens. And so you've got the chance before something bad happens to be proactive about it and to have a professional look at it. This isn't something, electrical is something that has a license for a reason. You have to be the right kind of person to get back there and look at it. So those two seem like really important takeaways for folks who meet in older facilities.
We just say once a year, that's the time to walk through. Back in the day, it was always, hey, get an inventory of everything in your church or in your school. Nobody gets an inventory of things. You can't. By the time you finish the inventory, it's already outdated. So what we tell ministries to do is once a year is to walk through your entire campus, every room, spend a couple of hours walking through and looking at everything, and go through and with a camera, record everything as you're going through. Just kind of open each closet door, look inside each closet, narrate what's in there. And at the same time, start looking at how you're using electricity in each one of these rooms. And those are, maybe you're not going to have a professional electrician, but get your guy or gal in the ministry that knows about these kinds of things to be part of it as well. And just that big annual inspection, looking at your inventory and looking at how things are being used.
Well, okay, before we kind of turn our attention to insurance more than just the risk management part of this, are there any other kind of low cost or simple tips that you would say, here are things I always make sure and say about prevention or protection related to fire?
Sometimes when we've got a larger building, maybe an older building, and we start renting it out or allowing others to use it, it's tough because that's not your ministry. And it's hard to control what it is that they're doing. So we want to make sure that they have the right insurance and that the responsibilities are spelled out beforehand. You should have an agreement between the two organizations, because I can't tell you how frequently we have like a ministry that's just grateful that they got a space to use and they're using a church's space and they're thrilled to have it and they don't want to bother you too much. And so they start plugging in hot plates and they start plugging in, other things, let alone the musicians get involved. You know how tough that is. But really, that's something that you need to look at that and just not say, hey, you can use the fellowship hall from this time to this time and we're all good. No, you have to have an agreement and the responsibilities need to be spelled out, because frequently we do have claims involving a tenant that was responsible for the damage. And we want to make sure that they have the proper insurance. But even before that, you want to avoid the claim altogether.
That's so interesting. I asked you about here's prevention tips, and your mind or your answer went straight to facility use. And I do think that points to the fact that church buildings, ministry buildings are often used for so much more than just the Sunday morning gathering by people that aren't running the Sunday morning gathering. And I just think that's such an important thing for ministry leaders to consider, that it's, if you want to talk about fire prevention, talk about how your facility is being used and by who. And do you know what they're bringing in? And do you have written documented agreements on how that's being used? I think that's really, really smart. And you even mentioned hot plates, crock pots, things that can, by all accounts, unintentionally get used improperly in a facility that's not lived in by people 7 days a week. There's just all kinds of ways that can go sideways on you. So I think that's a really good consideration for ministry leaders.
It's good to have that documentation, but it's also I think most important is that relationship. It's not just a landlord-tenant relationship. You're using your facility as part of your way to reach the community. Sometimes reaching the community may not be through your particular ministry, but it's other ministries that you bring in. But it doesn't stop there. You've got to constantly have that communication. Make sure that you're sharing with these maybe smaller ministries best practices, not just on facility care, but on all the other liability things as well. And that's where we go into child protection and things like that, because we want to kind of maybe mentor these ministries that we're hosting in our facilities.
All very good. Okay, so we've touched on a little bit the insurance part of this, not just the risk management part, but let's turn our attention specifically to an insurance policy that's built for fire risk. What are the most common gaps or missing pieces for ministries or other nonprofit organizations related to fire risk? Where are they most vulnerable?
The big thing is the value. And, when I look at, ministries are budget conscious, and sometimes someone will give us a copy of their, expiring policy, or they'll send it to me and they say, hey, check this out. And the person that made the decision to buy the insurance was so price conscious that they weren't coverage conscious. And we need to look at those building values and say, is this a realistic number? The insurance agent has a responsibility to go to the ministry and advise them. But it's really up to the person that purchases the insurance to make sure that the values are, what they're wanting. What I see values that are sometimes too low. And we've just experienced the Paradise. We experienced Paradise. We had Altadena. We had Pacific Palisades. We kind of deal with it each year. And the ministries that aren't able to rebuild are the ones that didn't have adequate limits to begin with. And so I think the place to start is looking at the building values. The next thing is the time element coverage. Time element means, if the fire is, one incident. Time element is coverage that extends over time. That's the coverage for extra expense, so you can worship somewhere else. It could be the lost income from if you have a school or a tenant that's there. Or it could also be lost or decreased tithes and donations, which is something that needs to be addressed as well. But that's a time coverage that's still in the property family, I guess you could say. We need to make sure that you have adequate coverage to sustain your ministry for, 1 to 5 years. I have one ministry. It took them 8 years to rebuild. And so that's very important. And I think the other one that doesn't get a lot of attention, because a lot of people just look at that building limit, is the cost to bring buildings up to code. Um, the Americans with Disabilities Act exempted religious not-for-profits, or churches specifically, I think. They exempted them, and so they didn't have to bring their buildings up to code. Well, when a fire happens, then you have to do everything and bring it all up to code. And these things change. In California, it's twice a year it's looked at. And so, we don't know how much it's going to take, but ordinance and law coverage is really, really important because you may have to have ADA access, sprinkler systems, you upgrade to green. We've got whole different systems in place.
Okay, I want to double click on a couple of those things that you just mentioned because they get me very, very interested in making sure that our listeners really understand the stakes here. Those time element policy pieces or coverages there, that's interesting to me because this is me being a novice with this, speaking the actual insurance language. But if you were a commercial business, you might have to prove that you have no income and have to close your doors in order for those things to be active, for those coverages to trigger. But for a ministry, if you have to close your doors and say, I'm not operating, your church, all of your people will go elsewhere. They'll find other churches to meet at. So you have to be able to continue to meet while your building is being reconstructed. That's a really unique part of those time element coverages. Am I understanding that right?
Yeah. And to me, that's not an option. It can't be an option. Oh, we're shut down the church and 3 years later, we're going to open up the doors. And, how are you going to continue to minister to those people? I mean, ministry continuity, it's kind of important. We need to keep doing that. And so there's two different things you look at. If you've got a church that has one building, they've got a concentration of risk in that one building. And it's different than a church that has one building versus a church that maybe has a smaller chapel or a fellowship hall or something like that, where they could continue to meet. It'd be great if every ministry had a relationship with another religious organization in the community that said, hey, if we ever have a fire, if we ever have a major thing, we want to use your facility and we'll rent for it. And there's insurance coverage for that. That's that extra expense coverage. Say, hey, ministry, we want to use your facility, and then kind of reciprocate back and forth. But that really, it's kind of few and far between then that happens. But we've had large ministries where we've had to use, we brought in tents, but that gets kind of old a little bit. It's renting somebody else's facility. Usually it's another religious not-for-profit. We've had it where you're in an office park, but then you need to make it into something that's appropriate for worship. And those are all the types of things that may be covered under the extra expense coverage. And it's not cheap. It's not cheap to do it. And that's what insurance is for. And so it's hard to sit there on that limit, on that coverage, and say, hey, Pastor Adam, you want to know how much business income coverage I need? One of us is asking is, what is the right amount? I mean, it's tough. You can look at things like, there's some websites that you can go to and start comparing and seeing what another facility similar to yours would rent for. And one of the problems we see with some insurance policies is it has a high limit, or it says actual loss sustained, but it's only for 12 months. Good luck rebuilding your building in 12 months if you've got a major loss.
And most churches wouldn't be able to say, hey, we're just going to take a year off or 2 years off. You guys can go meet elsewhere. But when we open our doors back up, we want you back. That's not feasible. And ministry leaders listening to this, they would know that's not feasible. And it kind of really boils down to, and I'm asking you a question, but it's really, I want to provide a question for the people listening. Are you confident of how your policy would respond if a fire made it so that you had to rebuild? Like, how long would it help you meet elsewhere, or would it help you meet elsewhere while your operations were amended? And with the other piece of that, when you mentioned specifically, you named the coverage ordinance and law, when you have to bring your building up to code, there are some cases where if even a certain percentage of your facility was affected, you have to bring the whole facility up to code. So there are ways that your building valuation and how to repair it can be deeply impacted by those code, the code standards. So just I don't know, boiling that down to a specific question, how would my policy respond if I had to bring my building up to code? Those kinds of things. Ministries ought to feel empowered to make sure their policy is doing right by them. It's not really a question, but what do you think about the right questions to ask, I guess?
Those are the two areas of property coverage that we talk about with ministries on an annual basis, because it changes so much. We look at the renewal and we say, okay, guys, this is what the renewal looks like. But ordinance and law bring it up to code just because it's such a challenging thing to do. And even if your building's just, I was at a church the other day, it looks brand new. I mean, it's a beautiful facility. It's 25 years old. And, the codes have changed so much in 25 years. We need to look at that one. And the extra expense, that needs to be evaluated regularly. For a church, it's important. I think what's even more challenging is with a preschool or a school, because, ministries have spent decades, building up the attendance, and you're doing a disservice to the kids by not having an emergency plan or a contingency plan to have school services operate off of your premise should a major accident happen.
That's also good. And you just actually mentioned something I want to ask about more thoroughly on the documentation and the planning piece. What are the things that before a fire happens, churches, ministries, and nonprofits can have in place in the way of documentation and planning so that if a fire occurs, they can begin the recovery process and the steps forward more, effectively and even quickly? What are the things they need to document and have in place?
What I mentioned earlier was the videos going through, and when a major claim happens, we send out people that are restoration companies, and sometimes they'll help do the inventory. But man, it's really tough when it's all burned down, or it's tough to kind of recreate that. So it's really important to have that video evidence. And I know this doesn't sound like the insurance conversation, but good financials. Good financials. You want, because if you were to have an extra expense or business income type of a claim, we'd be comparing financials to financials because we want to fill that gap. Yeah, but those are things that we need to be talking about regularly, and it's not just the person that's meeting with the ministry insurance advisor. It's ultimately a responsibility of the board of directors, and they're the ones that are burdened with that or privileged to manage that. Got to look at it regularly. Talk to the insurance person.
Yeah, and I don't mean to, put more of a heavy burden on ministry leaders, but if you have someone in your ministry who is wired for details and loves this kind of stuff, in addition to that video walkthrough, which is great, I'm just thinking about the fact that I sometimes leave my guitar at our church facility. It's not the church's property, but it's on the church's property. Having the serial number, date of purchase, what it costs when I bought it, those would be things that would be a big advantage in addition to that video walkthrough. So if you've got somebody who's wired for that kind of thing in your ministry, who lives for that kind of detail, man, that kind of thing, serial number, date of purchase, what it costs when it purchased, it really helps your insurance adjuster, your agent, to be able to really round out what a recovery should look like if a total fire takes over.
I'd love to say that having a list of all those things would be good, but I think the most effective one, the one that actually gets done, sometimes I say that, what's the best kind of inventory to take for a ministry? It's the one that actually happens.
Yes.
If your ministry is wired to do it, by a list, well, you can go through and check everything out and, take notes on all that, and somebody be really proud of it. It's going to take years to do. Nobody's going to redo it again. I think that just pick that annual date, maybe right after the first of the year, go around. And when you're talking, it's really important, like you talked about, Adam, is the make, model, maybe the estimated price. So when you're going around with the video camera, go in and kind of, hey, this is what we've got. This is the kind of guitar that was left at the church, or this is what we really invested in. Yeah, it's very important.
That's excellent. Okay, so let's get into some specifics. And again, without sharing, church names and details and things like that, can you give us an example to give us some sort of real life texture to put on this of a church that maybe handled a fire, either preparation or response really well, or maybe on the unfortunate side, a ministry that wasn't ready and their road has been more difficult?
Oh, I've got quite a few we can talk about, Adam.
Yeah. Anything is good. Just, I guess what this does is, if there's a ministry leader listening, this takes it out of the realm of the hypothetical, recognizing that, like, unfortunately this does happen. And so here's how it feels when it does.
You know what I thought was pretty cool to see, when sometimes we get involved in the tragedies, and when a building is lost, that's a really challenging thing for a church. But in the Paradise fires, which seems quite a while ago, we had one ministry lost their building, but you know what? The entire community was lost. And you had all the people that moved from there to the neighboring community. And that church, because they had the right extra expense coverage, we were able to rent another facility for them in an area where a lot of the people had moved to, and they'd been displaced over there. And so they put another church that they set up. Churches beyond the building. It was churches like where the people were, and they moved to where the people were. And they spent about 5 or 6 years over there. It's about 5 years. And then there was another church that didn't lose their building back in Paradise, but they lost the congregation. So everybody was displaced, but they had a building. And so what was really nice to see was that you had one church that had a fire loss. And so they received a check from the insurance company, and they were able to merge with that other church after about 5 years. And I think they've made one really healthy church in a community that was dramatically different. It was dramatically different after the fire loss than beforehand. And so they really adapted. And I thought it was, it was awful what happened in Paradise, but I thought that was really handled well with two churches getting along well together like that.
That's very hopeful. That's an awesome story. Would you have any on the side of, like, here's where a church missed their chance to be more ready for this, and how, what their journey has looked like trying to recover? I'm not fishing for bad news, but I guess I just want to.
It happens too often sometimes. People sit there and they go, we're going to get ripped off by the insurance company, and we've got to hire a public adjuster, an attorney, and it gets really confrontational between the two. And I'm going, wait a second, guys, it's a little bit different, with the relationship that we have with your ministry. Yeah. Work with us first, and no major property claim, let's say a fire, is going to not have its problems. There's always going to be problems.
Sure.
But it helps when you've got the relationship between the insurance company and the adjuster and the ministry and the agent right there between the three of you. You can really work well together. Where we've seen the biggest problems is when the first phone call the ministry makes is to a public adjuster or an attorney to handle it, and it just takes longer, costs more. People always feel like they're being not paid quite enough, and you'll have adjusters that show up, and the public adjusters that show up, and they say, well, you're going to get more if you work with me. Well, you read the fine print. They're taking a big chunk of that to get you maybe I don't ever see that going as smoothly as it should with the insurance carriers that we work with.
Well, and that really speaks to, and we never want this to feel exclusively like a Lightwell Insurance or in your case, a ChurchWest Insurance commercial when we talk on this podcast. However, there is a certain kind of advocacy that comes with working with the right kind of insurance agent for your church's unique needs. You talked at length about building valuation being a core part of having the right policy in place. From your perspective, having done this for 2 decades plus, what kind of difference does it make when you work with an insurance agent who really understands the unique needs of ministries as it pertains to fire prevention or really anything else, being those fresh eyes and being able to articulate that in an insurance policy? What difference does it actually make?
I hate to say it's a whole different world than the regular insurance world. Sometimes I explain it to ministries. I say, well, in the real insurance world, it's handled this way, but in the ministry insurance world, it's handled this way.
Right.
That's why I am so fortunate to be called to serve churches, because this is a lot of fun. And I feel like I feel the need for ministries, just because this is what I feel like I've been called to do. But it's a lot of fun working with ministries. The regular insurance world, it's much more confrontational. The coverages apply a little bit differently. And so I love the little bubble that I'm blessed to be in, because I think we can really dig in to our expertise, understand the individual exposures, learn from others. That's why I do like having this relationship among agents on a national network, because I'm able to call somebody up and say, "Hey guys, how did you handle this?" We collaborate a lot and learn from one another. And so, I don't know how you could protect your ministry by not working with a specialist, because it does take a specialist. I love to meet with a ministry and talk to somebody that's in the insurance world, because they see how vastly different it is in the church space or the school space or the or even the Christian university space than it is in the secular version of that.
Yeah. The more traditional commercial lines of insurance. That's a really, really good point. That you could even talk to agents in both of the industries, and they would be able to see just how different the two are. And that really, we've talked about this before on this podcast, that really does speak to redefining or expanding the definition of stewardship. Because so many times stewardship can get equated with saving money or spending less, which is not a bad ambition at all. And I understand ministries would even want to be very, very careful with every dollar. Those have been donated to the church to do ministry work. But when it comes to taking really good care of your ministry, you got to expand that definition of stewardship to include, do we have everything we need? Because the worst day to find out that you don't is when the fire has already happened and you don't have coverage for ordinance and law, or you don't have another place to meet. You don't have all those things in place. So I think you've laid that out really well for us today. And so I really appreciate that. And as we're rounding the corner toward the end, I want to ask you a question that I have asked everybody this year. And it's been really cool to kind of get everybody's different answers. You spoke to this just slightly about feeling called to this work. And so I want to ask you, Charlie, what keeps you inspired, or what inspires you to keep going when it comes to that calling of serving churches through insurance solutions?
I feel like the job's not done. There's such a tremendous need for expertise in this space. I don't know. How do you like that answer, Adam?
It's good.
Yeah. Well, all right, then I'll say it.
Say it.
Adam, I feel like the job just simply isn't done. Ministries are evolving. It takes somebody with our foundation in our office and our expertise to help the ministry evolve as we get into a world of AI and other things as ministries start to change. It's changing, and we're evolving with it. It's not done. Ministries still need insurance, and also I think what's tough is that you've got churches aren't stagnant beings. It's very dynamic. You've got a pastor that might come in or come out of the church, and we've got to bring the new person in and educate them and get to know them, and develop the relationship with them. But more often are the boards. The boards are changing, and these are board level decisions, and we need to constantly be supporting those people in those roles and providing them with the resources and the right guidance for ministry continuity. A fire, like we've been talking about today, is one of the really challenging ones that we need to really talk about annually, every couple of years, addressing it with the ministry, what we're doing, because as ministries evolve, we want to make sure that we're keeping that kind of fresh on the forefront.
That's excellent. Well, Charlie Cutler with ChurchWest in the state of California, I want to say on behalf of the churches in California that you serve, thank you for what you're doing to make sure that they are prepared and that they are safe. And on behalf of the Lightwell Podcast, thank you so much for taking the time to talk with us today.
Thank you for having me, Adam. It's been a joy. Appreciate you, buddy.
My thanks once again to Charlie Cutler with ChurchWest in the state of California. What a great conversation. I hope you had maybe a pen and a pad and were able to take some notes, because he gave a lot of very good practical tips and steps that ministries can take both in prevention and response when it comes to fires. The biggest one honestly feels like, are you getting some fresh eyes and a specialist to take a look at what your ministry needs in this area? And so if you don't know who to call, Lightwell.com is a great place to start. You can go there, find an insurance agency in your area that can help you take a fresh look at your ministry and what exactly you need to be ready to prepare for or respond to fire risk in your area. So until the next episode of the podcast, let's go and let it shine.